what's amazing about it too is there's never a sensor to sense any type of risk, right? Like spider mites or powdery mildew, things like that. Well, now the AI can pick it up about 3 weeks before the human eye can. So imagine now you're a grower. You don't have to worry about if you're going to pick up some type of powdery mildew here because your AI is going to get it 3 weeks before you could do it anyways. And think about how much that could cut losses if it picks it up and you can address it there.
What's up, guys? Welcome back to another episode of The Time. I'm Brian Fields, and with me, as always, is Kellen Finney. And this week, we got a very special guest, David Fettner, managing partner of Grow America Builders. David, thanks for taking time. How are you doing today?
Awesome. Thanks so much, Brian.
Excited to have you here. Kellen, how are you doing?
Doing well. Excited to talk to David. Excited to dive into all building related to the industry. It's a exciting topic for everyone. How are you, Brian?
Yeah, I'm stoked. I think we're going to talk about some topics today that some people might be considering right now, and timing is super critical because unless David is going to reveal himself today as a magician, we've got some things that we need to solve and get in front of.
I'll pull something out of my pocket.
Yeah, dude, sometimes I think that's what they're hoping for because I think we both know there's a problem. And it's like, I think timing, again, is like the critical aspect, right? And I think sometimes people need to recognize if they're aware that they have a situation or they may have a situation, sometimes reaching out to someone like yourself, David, ahead of time before they sign that lease might be one of the best decisions they can make all along the way. So I guess before we dive into it, can you give a quick background about yourself and how you found your way to the cannabis space?
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah. So I was at a construction company here in Chicago for about 20 years. Also, I was a zoning attorney. So I practiced zoning law, entitlements, etc. Never stopped smoking, right? Smoked, every day through college, through life, through adulthood. And, we were still medical here in Illinois, but we're about to become adult use. And I'm like, every day's a grind. I'd rather be a grind, in an industry like cannabis, emerging, something that I'm passionate about, which we all hear that word passion, right? I even hate saying it, like I'm passionate about it, but, we are. And I'm like, all right, well, let me see what's the entry to get a dispensary in Illinois. It was like $7 million. So I'm like, all right, well, that's off the table, but I know how to design things. I know how to build them. I know how to get entitlements. I can create a company where we're kind of like a one-stop shop, right? You have a license, you need to get it built. Here we are. Just thought we were going to do Illinois, right? Chicago area. Got very lucky. We owe really to Verano for giving us our shot. They let us start doing dispensaries for them on the East Coast, down south. In fact, the funny story is we're at a lunch with I think it was their director of architecture or construction. He's like, hey, do you guys want to build in Arkansas? And my partner was next to me and I'm like, yeah, we'd love to. And my partner's kicking me under the table, like, Arkansas. We got out of there. He's like, how the heck are we going to build in Arkansas? I'm like, well, we'll figure it out. You say yes and you figure it out later, right? I think Richard Branson said that. And it turned out to be a great project, and we got confidence, to start building outside of Illinois, New Jersey. Long story short, we've now built in 19 states, just started in Maryland, our 19th state, probably over 150 projects, ranging from, small micro grows to, over 100,000 square feet of canopy and flagship dispensaries, some kitchens for some pretty big names. And that's where we are today. It's all we do. I think we're one of the only national companies, design build, that only works in cannabis. So nothing else.
Just to start like early on, I'd imagine based on your construction background and then the zoning understanding, you probably came into cannabis thinking like, okay, like I can apply some of these elements and make this kind of a seamless transition. Were there elements that surprised you about cannabis, how maybe construction element worked differently or zoning element worked differently than just kind of normal?
Yeah, amazing question, actually. Zoning for sure, right? I mean, don't forget, this was like 2017, 2018. So we're still walking into states where the city council or the zoning board is not really friendly to cannabis, right? We're usually one of the first or second type of facilities in that state or in that town. So number one, I'm used to building out bars or restaurants or schools where, sure, no problem, approved. Here, it's like, well, what does cannabis smell like? What's the security risk? Are my kids going to get access to it? No, I don't think we're going to approve it. Come back here in 4 weeks and prove us otherwise. So on the zoning part, yes. And on the construction part, especially on the cultivation, I had to learn. I'm like, what the hell's a fertigation? What does that mean? And then IMP panel, what is that? There's a learning curve. There truly was, which I love. Like, I love that part about it, but there's definitely different aspects. Then you throw in the security to it. You throw in, some, working with cultivators or directors of cultivation who, they're They know how to do it their way. And also, doing a commercial project, a lot of our clients are operators. They're bringing in amazing growers, but who grow maybe, outdoors, right? For years. Legacy growers may not be used to taking it indoors on a 20,000 square foot, fully commercial canopy. So kind of working within those parameters too. But yeah, absolutely. There's a pretty big learning curve on the grow side. Dispensaries, it's a retail shop for all intents and purposes. Add some more security, some good concept, but on the grows, definitely.
On the grows specifically, how do you balance like the decision fatigue where those cultivators come in, they've got maybe preferences or recommendations when you're like, well, this is different than leadership wants, or this is different than we spec'd out. How do you balance those two approaches so that both can improve and benefit from the situation?
Yeah. So I always, I'll at the very first, I'll talk to whoever the operator is, right? The owner of the project. I'll say, what's your end game? Is your end game to have this for 20 years, right? And to be, something you could pass on to family, or is your end game to flip this in a few years, right? And sell to an MSO or to sell to, some type of VE partnership that's trying to grow a cannabis brand. And if their answer is like, no, and most of the time it's no, we're flipping this, right? We want to sell out. Then I'm going to say, okay, I'm going to talk to the grower. Still, the grower has a lot of input, right? This is their baby, but it has to be built almost like a spec, right? Where like, hey, the next grower can come in or the next company could come in and everything has to be set up for anybody to jump into it. It has to really keep the general parameters that, 9 out of 10 growers would have. So, but there's a balance there because, a lot of growers grow incredible weed and they know their process. So, it's a little give and take. I think we're pretty good at it, to the point where we're not offending anybody if we say, no, we can't do this. But, there is, it is a little slippery slope.
The first thing that comes to mind might be like the environmental conditions, right? And maybe the management's like, all right, we're speccing out like an HVAC for this system. And the grower's like, no, I need different ones. So in those environments, like that is a challenging one, right? Because you're kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you where it comes into place. It comes into play in the room sizes, right? It comes into play as far as like the programming. There's some growers who want, to have, 3 rooms of, 8,000 square feet of canopy each, right? And there's some growers that, will want, 15 rooms, at 500 square feet each canopy. Or they'll want to do a combined, dry trim packaging room, right? Like all combined into one room. And that may be what they're used to, but that's also, probably not going to be compliance and really not what, the next guy up is going to want. So it's really in the programming part of it. On the HVAC, I'll tell you where we get issues, lights, right? Because there are some growers that they've got their lights, they're tried and true, and they will not even beta test another one, and that's where we go, the operator like, hey, those lights are great, but they're like $2,000 a light. Do you want to test? And they'll be like, yeah, of course. The operator, of course, want to save some money and test different lights. And that's where the fights happen, under lights. You can imagine. Yes.
It's like that challenging balance though of understanding of like how to set up the situation, but how do you refrain from being not a consultant per se, but also how do you understand that like you're setting them up for success so that they're not pointing the finger there. So where is that line and how do you feel comfortable in navigating between both of them?
So I think one of, what we have now is that we have historical data, right? We can point to other facilities we've done that are successful. Hey, this is how we set this one up. Oh, okay. You did so-and-so's and he's happy. So we have a little credibility on that aspect. Again, it's a small industry, right? So if we're talking to a grower and he's not really happy with what we're trying to preach, we can say, well, go talk to so-and-so, we did almost a similar thing. He's happy with it. But it's the end of the day, it's the person who's writing the checks for this thing, right? Because, whether it's the operator, a lot of times the growers are partners too, right? But the pushback on the lights or the pushback on the programming, we could also fall back in compliance because a lot of times, the way they want to set up may not meet compliance. But look, we would rather be the bad guy, right? And kind of play good cop, bad guy and make sure that the operator and their grower, are still copacetic. And, if we have to take the fall on that or take the hit, we will, because if this thing goes sideways or if it doesn't meet compliance and they don't get licensed, they're coming back to us. Right? Like it's our ass, but everybody wants the same thing. I would say, as far as like the butting heads and the pushback, it'll happen early on a little bit, But for the most part, it's been very smooth sailing. I mean, I got to be honest, like, again, other than a few funny stories with lights or some programming, right? Setting up kind of the rooms a different way that some guys are used to. Most of it's been pretty good.
Are like all of these conversations identical regardless if it's a new build or if they've like signed a lease on, say, maybe not an ideal building? Is there maybe some sort of compromise with like, hey, this is the rooms you have here, and like maybe we could do this or that to like help increase yields?
Yeah, I mean, right. It's all about increasing yields. I mean, end of the day, it's about increasing yields, right? It's about how, and if there's track records or if there's something that anybody can point to. And I'm open-minded to anything too, right? I mean, I'm totally open-minded to any type of, idea that comes from any place, because you have to be. But, like somebody signs a lease already on a facility. And my biggest heartburn is walking to a building and the client already says, we signed a lease on this 2 weeks ago, or, we've had this, I've had this for a few months, because I don't know what I'm walking into. So if I'm walking into a building and God forbid, it's got, like 8-foot ceilings and it's got 200 amps, single phase power. And it's just like, that's where we have to start being creative. And that's where I get really nervous, okay, maybe you should have talked to us before you signed the lease, or talked to somebody, right? Not just us, but anybody, that kind of knows what they're doing with this, because would have either told you, A, walk away or run, or B, whatever you've plugged in for a price per square foot to do this, it's probably going to be 2x now, right? Because we're going to have to figure out a way to raise ceiling heights and, bring in, way more power than you're expecting. And so that's, bringing into an existing building is always scary to me. And then you add in, hey, what can we do between, the grow ops and the operator and all that? That's what makes me nervous.
Do you have like a checklist that like you work with the client on before you guys just even evaluate buildings and stuff?
Yeah, I think it's up to 42 points now, like a 42-point checklist when I walk in. And then when I started, it was like an 8. But
learning though, right?
Right, 100%. It's a very fluid document. But yeah, because there's so many things, and every time you walk into a building, most of the time they're not ideal. Once in a while you get one, it's like Goldilocks, right? Like just perfect. But most of the time they're always going to have their quirks. But, as long as you tell the client ahead of time, also it's going to help the operator and the client negotiate with the landlord, right? Because they could come back and be like, hey, great building. What you're asking for, though, I'm going to have to put in, an extra $100,000, to reinforce the roof, or, I'm going to have to spend, $250,000 to bring in, 3-phase power here, or whatever it is. It gives them a little bit of negotiating tool also. But yeah, we've got a pretty lengthy checklist. Even broadband. We would look at facilities in rural areas. This happened in rural New Jersey, and dude, they didn't have broadband signal out there. And you're running a business, right? You're running a factory. You need to have high speed internet. Now with Elon's what's it called?
Starlink.
Shout out Elon.
Starlink. Now it's a non-issue, right? But back then, how are you going to run a business without broadband?
That they're like, well, we didn't think about that. We brought you in, David, to fix the ceilings and the power of the internet. We just take for granted.
That goes back to your magician comment, right? Now, what am I supposed to do? Yeah,
be a magician.
Bring the broadband in. So
what's been the most challenging state to deal with? And I mean, I'm just curious since you brought New Jersey up.
Yeah. The most challenging state from our point of view, I would say New Jersey's up there for sure, because New Jersey, I think everybody kind of knows, right, that New Jersey's got its quirks, and it's still a very small town. It comes down to the local government. I would say California is pretty difficult to deal with. We try not to do anything in California too much anymore. But, even Illinois, right, which is our hometown, I think if somebody comes out of state and tries to work in Illinois, they would get hit with a lot of issues, and they find it very hard. For instance, we're like a casino style security. So in any grow areas, back of the house, plant touching, have to see hands at all times. Hands always have to be visible, right? So it adds a little bit extra cost on security. IBOA, you have to do special inspections before you even start your drawings, right? They want to look at the building first. So, I'd say New Jersey, Illinois, if you're not used to it, but they're all hard, except for Montana. Dude, we built in Montana. We called them for final inspection, and they're like, yeah, they're like, you're good. They're like, what do you mean we're good? like you're good, you can start growing. And I'm like, well, don't you want to come see it? Don't we want to see what's going on here? They're like, yeah, we'll come in a few months. We'll pop in. I'm like, but they can start growing? They're like, yeah, they're good. It's like, okay, I guess we're good. So, but they all can't be like Montana.
Yeah, I don't know a lot of people are shutting down Montana, but that's great to know. So when then is the ideal time to call you and your team? Is it as early on in the process, and you mean maybe even too early, where they're like, hey, David, I got this idea. I'm starting to look at properties. Like, now is the time to bring you in?
That's it. When somebody tells me I'm starting to look at properties, and sometimes they feel bad asking us, right, to come look. And because we don't charge for that. Like, I'm not coming and charging for, site visits and look at, this is what we do. So yes, when somebody starts looking for properties, and some people will call us early on in the licensing process, because, we'll help with SOPs and we'll help with figuring out, there's like, sometimes there's property narratives, right? Like in New Jersey, you have to do like a property narrative on why it's suitable. But yeah, as soon as somebody starts looking or working with a broker, we love to tag along, because we'll tell you if it's a lemon, right? Hey, get away, or this is a good facility, figure, an extra, $25 per square foot because you have to do this. So if we can come in when you've narrowed it down to maybe 5 locations, that's perfect, because then we can kind of make sure you're covering your ass too.
Yeah, and that makes a ton of sense, right? Just like thinking through that. And I can understand why they might be hesitant to bring you in, because they're like, well, we're so far away from that concept. But from your side, that's the perfect time, right? Because you can walk it with them and say, hey, consider this concept or that concept. And now they have a chance to kind of pick your brain on things, A, they should look for when they go back to the table, but B, now they can kind of trust you in elements and know that, like, you've done this before, you know what to look out for, you know how to avoid those obstacles and those landmines that have probably crushed so many operators who have budgeted X and realized that they have to 2X that in order to get started, which kills some of these companies who are operating in such a tight margin space.
Oh, yeah, for sure. And if I walk through, I'll start asking them questions about how they're going to operate. How are they going to grow, right? So like if I come in, I'm like, so, what do you want to do here? And like, oh, we're going to, we want to get about 5,000 square feet of canopy, but we're going to stack it. We're going to do 2-tier system, well, hold on, our ceilings are at 12 feet, like that's something we need to look at, what is your process? Or there may be a project and they're looking, they want to put maybe like a living soil type grow on the second floor, right? With very heavy bins. And maybe that second floor can't support it. So I always ask the process, right? How are you going to grow? What's your process? And then from there, they'll tell you, how are we going to lay this out? What are we going to do with the building? Each building's going to have its own characters, its own quirks. But that's my bar. I would say to anybody, even if it's not us, before anybody, locks down a building, get an architect in there, get somebody that's put these things together, because it's going to save you, heartache.
Do teams that you've worked with say, hey, David, we're looking to go to Montana in the next 6 or 12 months. Can you go find us a building? You understand what we're looking for. We'd like to expedite this process. Have teams reach out to you and say, hey, can you help take us one step further down the chain?
Yeah, I'm actually doing that right now for a company in Minnesota, right? And hey, can you find, first of it, can you find a broker? And I, know a lot of brokers in this industry. Can you find a broker? Can you, team up and look for buildings and then narrow them down? And when you have, 3 or 4 good listings that you think are good, and we'll give a little report. We'll say, okay, listing number 1, here's a report on it. Here's, how much it'll probably cost to build it out. Here's what you have to do for it. Is it in a good green zone? Will you have to get a special approval? Blah, blah, blah. Yeah, we do that all the time, actually. That stuff's fun. Get on the road, look at buildings, see what you can figure out with them and how you can make it work.
Do they typically come to you with like a full-fledged business plan that's like, hey, this is what we're looking to yield out of the building, this many lights, or is it kind of a mix?
Very, very rarely. So we have a questionnaire for the actual operators, right? So like we have our questionnaire and our checklist for the building. We have like a 2-page questionnaire for the growers, because, they may know, but they may not know even what they have to tell us. So we've made it very easy. It's a questionnaire, right? Exactly. First of all, what's your growing process? What's your method? How many lights per room do you want to do? What's your total canopy? What are you going to try to yield out of this? What's your end game? How are we going to phase it, right? Are you going to do everything at once, which I would not recommend, right? Or are we going to phase it into maybe, 2 or 3 phases? I even try to get down to like, what is their preferred humidity levels in each of the room and what is their climate and everything. And once I get all that, I kind of put it into the pot. And then I can, look and walk through the building with a little bit more detail. But yeah, very rarely, that's a great question. Very rarely do they come to us with the data, but we'll be able to pull it out of them.
I'm just envisioning some teams coming to you and then how that conversation goes. It's probably fun.
It's fun. Yeah.
They show up with like some of their cannabis and they're like, look what
this is my premier product. I did it in Arizona. I'd like to bring it to New Jersey. How why
Yes.
can't I do it? You're like, well,
Right, right.
What
And-
about
and- but yeah,
what about upgrading facilities, right? If there are teams looking at CGMP, obviously we've already heard about EGMP in the future, but are teams
Yeah.
talking about this now? And is this something
Yeah.
where you can help out or you can guide it all?
yeah, no, that's I mean, that's the kind of top of the talk now of everybody, right, in the industry. Upgrading facilities, not just for GMP compliance, right, which New York is mandating it, which is, crazy. But, also there's some older facilities there that are still running on HPSs, right? And as great
What's
as,
an HPS?
HPS lights. So, you have the new LEDs and the HPS that's what everybody grew with, for last 30, 40 years, right?
Davita.
Right. And then they grow great bud, but they're being, they're really being pushed out. And not only that, but the energy usage is insane out of it. 95% of any new facilities being used with LED, but the older ones, right? And they have to be replaced a lot. And, you're looking at your electric bill and you're like, this is crazy. So a lot of older facilities have to be upgraded with lights. I mean, just think about, I'm sure, you guys have been in a million facilities. It was done, they were all done dirty, right? Like, and not in a bad way, right? That's just kind of, how we say, hey, and even now, if there's not a big budget, hey, all right, we're going to do it dirty, but eventually it's going to have to be upgraded. And there's a lot of things you can put into a facility that doesn't even mean it's got all the bells and whistles, but it's just up to today's standards for commercial grow. So not just upgrading to, trying to get something GMP certified or compliant, but even an older facility that was done with whatever budget there was at the time. Now's the time to maybe get it upgraded, get it ready to sell, get it ready to flip, something like that.
Yeah, the timing is probably never right? And maybe for some of those operators, the recommendation could be, let's do a slow incremental process, kind of like an investment phase, instead of having it hit all once, so you're not down for a certain period of time. But as you're saying, it's like, it's inevitable that some of these regulations and these other elements are going to come to fruition, and upgrading the facility is massive expensive, but needs to probably be considered sooner rather than later.
Right. And it can always be phased, but it's always hard. Like, how do you say, okay, once you harvest a room, instead of turning it around again, we're going to shut it down, right? And we're going to take the lights out and we're going to throw epoxy on the floor, and we're going to get, they're probably done with gypsum and just like a waterproof paint back in the day. Now, either put some FRP on there or get the IMPs, so it's like, it's very hard. If I'm an operator, how am I going to look at, what my bottom line is and be like, all right, we're going to shut down a room for, 8 weeks, because, so it's hard, but, upgrading, we do it. And there are guys that say, okay, we're going to do it very incrementally, 1 or 2 rooms, every few months. Then they'll get online and then we'll do a few more and a few more. And next thing you know, now you've got a nice upgraded facility that's up to the current standards of any good commercial grow.
Is that how you'd recommend it? Or is there a different approach that you found works better for some of these teams?
You know what? It's so subjective. Sometimes I wouldn't recommend it. I've walked in and I'd be like, you guys are growing great bud. I wouldn't even mess with it. Unless it's like a state mandated, compliance thing, just kind of leave well enough alone. And then I've been in others and they'd be like, hey, I can't figure out why, we can't get our plants to grow the way we want them to grow, whether it's, cannabinoids or THC level or whatever it is, or height or yields. And then we'll come in and it'll be obvious, but the answer is, well, we're going to have to shut these rooms down and kind of rebuild them or upgrade them. And then, that's our suggestion, whether you guys want to do it or not. I get it. It's a hard ask, but that's usually if there's a problem, it's facility related. This facility, this is going to sound weird, but it's just as much of a living organism, right, as anything else, right? I mean, it's breathing air in, it's taking air out. It's got its own climate. It's got its own blood flow as far as like the water and the irrigation system. And if it's not all working correctly and all like humming and dialed in, then your plants aren't going to be as dialed in.
I think that's so importantly said. And I think when you talk about some of these older buildings that have been outfitted now for these grows and for these facilities, sometimes that's forgotten. And I'd imagine from your experience, you've seen some seasonality changes where maybe in certain states, the seasonality changes from its conditions, weather condition, probably influence the products. Can you speak on that at all?
Yeah, I'm definitely, like we have a mandate here where whatever region we're going to do a project in, we're bringing in our engineer who's familiar with that region, right? So like, we're not going to bring in, if we're going to do a project in, the Northeast, we're not going to have an engineer that's familiar with, the desert, right? Arizona or something. Because engineering is so important. So we got brought in to try to help fix a project in Michigan, right? Kind of like upper Michigan. And there was a big, beautiful greenhouse, new, but they'd engineered a wet wall, right, inside the greenhouse. And, I think the engineer was from like the Palm Springs area or somewhere in the valley. And operator had 2 great harvests. And then summer hit in Michigan, super high humidity. And it was a shit show. I think they lost like 70% of their harvest, and they could not cool the place enough. Like they had brought in probably $500,000 in temporary equipment. I think we walked through there, and it was just like a disaster show. If it's not engineered right, if it's not engineered to the right climate, it could go off the rails real quick. And you may think, oh, great, we're humming along, we're pulling out great yields. But once you hit that high humidity, I mean, we had that in Montana where, they get super cold in the winter, but also hot as hell with, high humidity levels in the summertime. And so, the system has to be able to manage both. You really have to engineer it properly. So, otherwise trouble.
So do you have to build out like a range of outcomes when you're speccing out the building, saying, okay, if we hit these conditions, we need this?
Yeah. So, right. I mean, first of all, you're looking at it from where are we building at, right? Like, where are we? Are we in Illinois? Are we in California? Are we in Arizona? And then from there, the rooms have to be their own self-contained climate. I don't care what's going on outside, right? The rooms have to continue to contain it. Way easier to do in a, indoor like warehouse grow than a greenhouse, obviously, like a sealed greenhouse. But you have to make sure those rooms are self-contained. And depending on where you are, we actually passed on doing a greenhouse down in Mississippi because the client was adamant on doing a greenhouse, and we're like, it's just not going to work. Like a sealed greenhouse, like a positive pressure hybrid greenhouse, it's not going to work down there. It's very hard to say no to a project, but I just knew it was going to end bad. And I don't know how it ended up. Maybe it ended up great and I'm the idiot, but it was too risky because I just know a greenhouse cannabis grow in like down south is a recipe for disaster. So yeah, you have to take it all into account.
How much do sensors come into play these days with like helping to like maintain those environments that the building is designed for?
Massively critical, right? Massively critical. Everybody's always looked at the sensors. When we put a facility together, obviously you have all the data right on your iPad and on your phone, but we also place it everywhere. I mean, we'll place a monitor like in the break room, right? We'll place a monitor, like in the conference room. So you're always seeing what every room is doing, right? And every sector. And, that even kind of could segue us into like AI because that adds a whole nother level of detail and data. But everything needs to be out there. The grower, dude, first of all, these guys are so smart and so dialed in. I always say like, a good grower or head of cultivation. It's like a cross between like a mad scientist, right? A botanist, a geneticist, like, and they do stuff that I can never even, think about. Like I grow for fun outside, like outdoor, right? And I just see how much trouble I have with my outdoor plants. These guys are unbelievable. But that being said, they need help too, right? Because they're doing, they may have 50,000 square feet of canopy they have to cover. Without that data and without the sensors telling them exactly what's going on in each room in each sector, I think they'd be lost. So it's immensely critical.
Can you give us a range of the type of sensors that people are using?
Oh yeah. So, it's going to tell you what your humidity levels are, right? It's going to tell you what the high humidity was during the day and the low humidity percent. It's going to tell you what the temps are, and there's guys that be like, dude, I can't get my room, under 83 degrees and we'll try different things. So they'll always know. And there's, these guys, they're so particular, right? If you're a grower, you're so particular as far as what every room is doing. What the AI does, right, is it's going to tell you, it's going to get more in the micro details too. The sensors, it's like the size of like an iPad or like a laptop screen, right? And it kind of hovers over I haven't seen a good one for 2-tier yet. It may be out there, but just mostly for single tier. And it's going to constantly read every plant. And it's going to tell you, not just now to the room, right? Because the sensors are in certain parts of the room, but the AI is going to tell you exactly what each plant is getting, right? What this little area of a single plant may be hotter than the others, or maybe because of where the circulation is, it's cooler than the others, or it's not getting the right humidity level. It may not be getting more nutrients. It may need more water. It may be growing to a point where they can tell what the THC level is going to be. Maybe it's too low. What's amazing about it too is there's never a sensor to sense any type of risk, right? Like spider mites or powdery mildew, things like that. Well, now the AI can pick it up about 3 weeks before the human eye can. So imagine now you're a grower. You don't have to worry about if you're going to pick up some type of powdery mildew here because your AI is going to get it 3 weeks before you could do it anyways. And think about how much that could cut losses if it picks it up. And you can address it there. If you have a bigger room, right? If you have like a 3,500 square foot room of a flowering, you can contain it before it gets anywhere else. I think that's one of the coolest things about, what I've seen about the AI, that it can detect what the human eye can't detect yet.
No, I think that's an awesome visual for the people out there. And I think it talks about using tools that other industries use to take it from a reactive situation where the grower finds, right, these clients have these situations, to proactively being in front of it and trying to mitigate these issues going forward. And that information is kind of like a shifting of the landscape, right? And maybe earlier on, they didn't have those tools and they had to rely on the expertise of these people, which is awesome and super paramount. And all it does now is allow you to kind of multiply out your expertise out throughout the entire grow, because some of these leads are managing multiple facilities simultaneously, and it's nearly impossible to be in two places at once.
And it's not a tool that's taking somebody's job, right? That's the thing. It's not taking the job away. It's something that's helping, right, the director of cultivation and his people to be able to maybe do other things, right, and focus on other things. I think it's cool, and I think they're just scratching the surface with it too. But that was probably the things that blew me away most with the AI that we're starting to implement, is being able to pick up those types of risks way ahead of time, and also being able to figure out THC levels that are coming up. Because we had a guy and he's like, he was grew amazing, but like stuff you'd see in like high times that would just blow you away, but he was getting lower THC levels and couldn't figure out why. But now if he was able to implement the AI, it would tell him ahead of time, hey, this is not going to get over, 15% or something. Kill it, try again. You know what I mean? So, that I think that can really save a lot of guys with a lot of time.
How close are we to like the AI actually like controlling the rooms as well, right? Like say there's like a slight change in temperature or humidity, or it does find that pest. Why can't it deliver the chemical itself through the AI? I mean, it sounds crazy, like a smart building, right? Like how far?
No. I mean, so it can already do that with climate, right? So if it sees that like, hey, we need to adjust the climate, as long as you tell it and set it to give it autonomy, say, to do it, it'll do it with climate control, right? With humidity levels and with temperature and things like that. It needs to kick on the fans to higher speed, those types of things. I haven't seen it. I'm sure we're almost there. And I'm sure it can do it. I just don't know, right? I mean, because like every week something new's coming out.
Where does your guys' line, like where's your line with all of this, right? Like in terms of like helping the clients onboard software, like where do you guys kind of like hand it off? If that makes sense.
So first, we sometimes they don't even know it's available. So the first thing is we say, hey, I don't even know if but we can add this AI tech into your flowering rooms. And a lot of the AI companies, there's a few of them out there. I mean, they just want to get in, right? They want to get in, show what they can do, because I think once they show what they can do, so they'll say, hey, let us do 1 or 2 rooms. We'll give you a discounted price. So we're always the first person to say, hey, you may want to look in this AI. It's really cool. I stand by it because I saw what it can do. And then if you want it, it's really just a matter of kind of roughing in, right, the wiring and the data that it needs. So you can plug and play. And after that, I think, it's smooth sailing, and it can always be upgraded and updated.
What are a lot of the pushback teams are having when they're saying, I don't know, David, I've grown like this for 15 years. Why do I need sensors and AI in my grow?
That's it. That's what I hear. That's what I hear all the time, and I'll tell you where I get them. I get them on mitigating risk. That's really everybody's biggest fear. That's what we're super paranoid about. Our vice president of construction, Elliot, he was a Blue Apron, and after that he was with Acreage, and like his whole thing is GMP, risk mitigation. Making sure that nothing, if anything does come into a room, it's not gonna infiltrate other rooms. PP. So it's once you go to the director of operations, the director of cultivation, be like, hey, this isn't affecting your growing, right? But it's going to detect any type of risk. That's an easy sell. That's what they want to hear. And really, even the cost to get these things in there is not that much. So when they see how much it's going to cost, it can mitigate risk. Most guys want to try it in a room or 2 at least.
Sometimes what we hear is that like they see the data, but they're not sure if they should trust it or not. And they're like, well, we used it before.
I get it.
But I think what you're saying is so important is that like maybe today they don't think it's important, but if they lost 70% of their crop, management would have to shutter the business.
I'll give you an example. Under canopy lighting, right? A lot of guys would hear about, hey, try under canopy lighting. It's going to increase your yields. I'm like, screw that. Like, dude, you should see what I'm pulling out of here. I don't need under canopy lighting. And they're like, try it. Just try it. Try it in a room. I was just talking to a guy the other day. A legacy grower's been growing all over. Great bud, growing, in commercial grows. And he was told, hey, try these under canopy lights. He's like, no, screw you. Under canopy, what are you talking about? Then he tried it. He's like, it changed my world. He's like, it literally changed my world. He's like, you should see what I'm pulling out of here. Now all he'll do is above canopy and under canopy lighting. So same thing, just like with, implementing AI or different type of data solutions. I think, the proof is in the pudding. If it works, it works, right? If it doesn't work, they won't do it again. But, there's a lot of pushback in under canopy. And now, we're seeing it more and more grows and more, growers are accepting it and doing it.
Yeah, as they should be, right? Because at the end of the day, the tools are not there, exactly like you said, to replace their job.
Yeah.
It's there to alleviate some of the unknown elements that they don't have and give them the ability, instead of having to touch every single plant, now they can get a reading on their cell phone that says the health of the plant, and then they can go to that specific plant, maybe touch and spend the specific time it needs in order to nurture and love that plant to make it happy again, which they only would be able to find that out in these large grows if they had a sensor like that, or they'd have to continuously walk it all the time.
Yeah, I mean, I can't imagine how hard it is, to manage these large scale grows, right? With quality control and making sure you're hitting your yields and making sure, you're reporting back to whoever the head of operations is, or, the operator or the owner. So it's just one more tool that's going to help, right? It's going to help out. And I think as long as it does what it says it does, and it's not BS, and it's not selling false data, I think it's going to be the norm.
What areas for technology standpoint have you not seen yet that you were like, oh, growers talk to me about this. If this existed, it'd be awesome and make a big difference?
Not so much on the grower side, but I'll tell you what hasn't been implemented yet. And there's going to be a huge market for it is sustainability, right? To build that's like I always said, like the tongue in cheek, like my dream is like a fully sustainable, grow facility utilizing maybe geothermal technology, right? For the HVAC system. Maybe wind, solar, putting all that together. Because at the end of the day, we are growing, Mother Nature's plant, right? That's what this is. But the capital contribution, right? The cost to do a sustainable building is not cheap. Not right now, it's not. But I think in the future, that's where, maybe in 10, 15, 20 years, I'll be looking back on a lot of these grows and thinking these are kind of dinosaurs as far as like how much energy they're using and the footprint that it's leaving as far as like carbon footprint and everything. So I think that's kind of the area that I think there's a place for it. There's a need for it. I don't think the market's caught up with how much it costs, especially we all know how hard it is to access money to even get these things going. You're going to value engineer as much as possible, but like to build and design a fully sustainable, cannabis grow, I think that's, at 15, 20 years, I think that's going to end up being the norm.
Is the biggest challenge now the cost difference between doing the current way versus the sustainable way? Is that the biggest challenge today?
Money. I think that's the biggest problem in the industry, right? That's our across the board. And so if you have the money, right, and if you scratched and clawed and done everything you could to get exactly what you need to get your facility going, you're not going to spend an extra, $500,000 or $1 million so it's sustainable, right? The ROI may work out, in 5, 10 years, but like it doesn't make sense today. And I get it. Like I get it. But that's the number one roadblock is the money, how much it would cost.
How often do you see like companies try to bring like electricity generation on site in some form, like either solar or wind, at least to just like alleviate it a little bit, right?
Solar's getting bigger and bigger, right? Solar's getting bigger because first of all, there's rebates out there, right? So you can get solar installed. Sometimes it's a wash. You're not even paying anything out of pocket. But it's just a matter of like, you need space for it, right? You need like a big parking lot space. You need a lot of roof area. And then if you're putting on the roof, you may have to reinforce structurally, what the roof can handle as far as the load. So those are issues too you got to run into. So like if you have a perfect facility where you've got a whole big parking lot that's not going to be used, no brainer, bring in the solar, usually get rebates for it. But, on the same side, it has to be enough solar to actually make up the energy usage. and so you need a lot of space for it. But solar is, a lot of guys do try to get solar in there. That's for sure. That's probably the number one. Now, obviously LED, right, is a good, that's a good savings as far as energy usage. But, it's hard right now with getting enough panels to be able to provide enough power to get a grow going. Sometimes it does. I was on a panel in New Jersey, and I was like bemoaning like how bad, solar's not worth it, and you can't get enough solar generated. And then, lady raised her hand. She's like, I actually have a, 15,000 square. She goes, I actually have a grow, and we use almost all solar. And I'm like, oh, that's amazing. I'm like, but probably not that much canopy, right? She's like, no, actually like 15,000 square feet. And I'm like, oh, well, I stand corrected then. Like, that's great, And I wanted to grab her after just so I could kind of see. I wanted to visit it because, to be able to have a 15,000 square foot canopy grow, and she said they're pretty much all exclusively off solar. I wanted to see that thing. So yeah, that I haven't seen it yet, but I know they're out there.
What about items for facilities that today may seem like nice to have, but you think could be must have? For example, a backup generator.
Well, so the generator is important. I always ask, what's your grid like, right? Like, do you have a good grid or not? Do you lose power a lot? Are you in an area where you get hit with hurricanes or big blizzards? If the answer is yes, I'm like, all right. I'm like, it's not going to be cheap, but you're going to need to get a generator. If they're like, no, we have a solid grid. Maybe we lose power for a few hours once a year. I say, all right, make a good deal with a company that they'll back up a trailer for you. Right? They'll bring a trailer. You'll be able to, you'll be first priority on their list. Pay them a little extra, back it up. But some of the things I see, like epoxy flooring, right? Or IMP panels on the walls. Those are things that they're not necessary to grow cannabis, but they make life so much easier. You're able to turn your rooms around quicker, right? I always say, hey, if you don't have epoxy flooring, if you just have, straight up concrete with no sealer on it and gypsum walls, great. You pull the harvest out, you got to clean everything out, hose it down very carefully, right? Because you can't really get into the walls. It's going to seep into the concrete. By the time you dry it all out, maybe it's 3-4 days before you could bring, your next round of plants in. If you have epoxy flooring and, IMP panels or, some type of paneling system, it can be 24 hours, right? Now, those 3 or 4 days, you multiply that by every harvest cycle, that can be a whole nother harvest you can get in that room. So while it's not necessary to grow the good cannabis, it is necessary for efficiency, right? And to get the name of the game is to get as many harvests and to get as much yield out, every cycle. So those are the things. And sometimes, money's a factor and you just can't get it done. But those are things that, again, they don't affect the quality, but it affects your efficiency.
No, I think that's a great call because I think people make those decisions early on in the process and don't realize how, in that specific example, that's where they see it the most. Because if they're trying to get as many turns as they can in a year, that number multiplied over 12 months is one that's staggering.
Right. That's it. Exactly. You multiply over 12 months and you do the math. And so I push it gently, right? And I show, hey, this is probably what you can end up with if you do epoxy flooring or a good sealer. And you do, IMP, right? Insulated metal panels, where you just sit there and you can hose the whole place down. Then you add into your drains, floor drains, which again, floor drains are not going to change how you're growing, but you're going to squeeze everything into those drains. The room dries out that much quicker. It's really a no-brainer if you have the funds for it. If you don't have the money, I get it, right? I mean, I understand and we'll do it however, but those are little things that, I think everybody should try to do if they can.
For sure. And if the ROI is, 5 times, right? You spend $1 now to make 5 in the future. It's a difficult one today to swallow, but it's one of those where if you're checking the box on certain things, one like that should probably be more heavily considered than maybe in that immediate moment.
Yeah, right. Well, and getting back also, if you're going to sell this in a few years, right? If that's your end game, the next guy who's coming in, they're going to walk in and they're not going to want to retrofit it, right? And add in, a wall system and get everybody out of there and grind down the floors and epoxy them and or they're definitely not going to come in and cut floor drains. But if they come in and they see that's all done, that's an easy decision for them to make as opposed to, oh God, this place is really not done up to standards.
If you could get every client to understand one thing before they start, what would it be?
Ooh. Hit me with a good loaded question there. I would say kind of going back to what we talked about before, do the due diligence on the building, right? Before you start, make sure that the building can accommodate what you want to do. because if the building can't accommodate what you want to do, if you can't grow with it, like I know this just happened to me actually. So somebody has a license to do 15,000 square foot canopy, and they're looking at a building that's like 25,000 square feet. And I'm like, that's not going to work. Like our ratio, if you have 15,000 square feet of canopy, you want between 50 and 60,000 square foot building, right? Because the canopy is your flowering rooms. You still need your bedroom, you need your mother, you need your prop, you're going to need your trim, your packaging, probably 3 dry rooms, then your other support, your offices. So like you have a lot more square footage you got to fit into that. And so, that's, so you want to make sure the building's going to accommodate what you want to do. You may not start off with 15,000, right? You may start off with 2,500 or 4,000. But if that's your goal, you need to know what this building can actually accommodate. Otherwise, you're literally painting yourself into a corner.
That's where that checklist is nice and helpful.
Yeah, right. Totally.
What's the biggest mistake you see teams make?
Well, I would say, like cutting corners, that's not just going to affect the quality, that's going to affect the quality also, right? Cutting corners and doing, more, again, this isn't to knock anybody because we all know money's scarce, right? But, cutting corners for a cheaper HVAC system, going with cheap lights that are just, coming from God knows where, they're going to break down on you. And I understand wanting to get up and operating, but you're competing, right? There's guys down the street that are probably putting together something that's way more upgraded than what you're doing. So I would say the mistakes are, cutting corners where it's not just going to affect your efficiency, but also your quality, and being able to maintain the quality. And then, yes, getting back to the due diligence, we've had projects literally get stopped because mistakes have been made, like horror stories where like you wouldn't believe, projects started and then literally have to be scrapped, 4, 5, 6 weeks in.
Disaster. Last question.
Disasters.
What question do you wish more people asked you?
I wish, not so much a question, I wish people told me what their ballpark budget is, right? Because, we can design and build to almost any type of budget parameter. But if I don't know what that is, I'm kind of, I'm in the dark. So I always say, tell me your budget. Not because if you tell me it's, 5 million, I'm not going to make it 4,999,999 But I need to know because I can modify and target, what's important and what to put into this, and then value engineer what we don't need. So like, hey, if your budget is 2 million, I need to know. If your budget's 500,000, I need to know. If it's 5, and that helps me direct it. So, it's not so much a question to ask me, but something to tell me, right? About what is the budget ballpark. I don't need to know exact, but I need to know kind of what we're working with.
Yeah, that's such a great point. I can imagine those scenarios. People are assuming that exact same situation, that you're going to come in right under the budget because you want to hit your number. But you're right. Like you need to know like which elements to max out because they're priority based on what you've seen. And those other elements, you're like, well, we can just kind of like roughhouse this and make it dirty here because this is not critical today. And down the road, they'll have to look to invest later.
Oh yeah. I mean, on the dispensary side, I asked the client, he's like, well, design it, assume we don't have a budget. We want this to be a flagship. We don't have a budget. So I'm like, okay, I went back to our designer. He says no budget. And so we put together like an amazing design. We went through the design, the architecture, everything. And we showed it to him. This is amazing. I love this. We bid it out. He's like, guys, this is like maybe $400,000 more than we have. And I'm like, but that's why we asked what the budget. You said no budget. So you can design anything, like an A, a B, or a C. We designed it as an A, right? And an A plus. So, then he's like, all right. He's like, let's go back. He's like, I need it to be half the cost. I'm like, all right, now we know the budget, but now we just wasted like 8 weeks of design. So that's why it's important.
Probably was a banging ass dispensary.
Oh, it was so nice. It was so cool. It was amazing.
So David,
maybe one day.
I can only, he's probably thinking, he's like, that's sick. I wish I had $10 million, right?
Right.
So David, for our listeners, they want to get in touch and they need your help solving some problems. Where can they find you?
Amazing. Thank you. GrowAmericaBuilders.com. My phone, my cell phone is right on the front page. Just scroll down and that's me. Also email me, David@GrowAmericaBuilders.com. But that's the best way to reach me, and love to, talk. I love talking this stuff. You can tell.
Thanks for taking the time. This was a lot of fun.
Appreciate it, guys. Thank you so much.